Welcome again to the Thinking Clearly channel. Today is going to be a little bit different. I decided that considering all the conversation going on about socialism, capitalism, and everything we're going through, and the big bad bill, and everything else happening, that I would just do a educational video that was not politically based whatsoever. Of course, it involves politics, but not from my perspective today. It's just a educational video. I do want to give you just a little bit of background that I graduated with a finance degree from Boston University. I entered into a special program as a freshman and went into my major as a freshman, which was only 200 kids were allowed into that. I worked on Wall Street from 1978 until 2009. I worked for three large firms, all three were New York Stock Exchange firms. Two of them were the majors, and one of them was a regional. And I have a lot of experience, and I was a senior vice president of investments. So I'm quite well aware of economics and feel I'm qualified to do a video like this in teaching. Anyway, let's get into it and let's talk about capitalism versus socialism and really what is communism and how does it fit in here. To start out with, how economies really work, understanding what actually drives government economic policies. While people often argue whether capitalism or socialism is best, the reality is really more nuanced. The reality is most nations today, virtually all nations today, blend their economies between socialism and capitalism and or communism, just depending on their history, their values, and their political systems. But no economy in today's world is strictly one capitalist or communist or socialist. We learned a lot of lessons before this happened, before World War II. Things were very different, and especially in the 19th century, in the 1800s, things were very different. And that's really what drove us to more of where we are today, or really more to what happened after the Depression. So let's continue here. Let's discuss the four basic economic systems: traditional economy, command economy, which is communism, market economy, which is capitalism, and a mixed economy, a blended economy, which is really what virtually everybody in the world is today. What's capitalism? Well, capitalism, this is the first line, is the most significant issue of capitalism. It's private ownership of businesses and property, free market competition, minimal government involvement, and focus on innovation and profit. Socialism is where the government provides key services, higher taxes to fund public goods, redistribution of. What is socialism? It's where the government provides key services, higher taxes to fund public goods, redistribution of wealth, and private property is allowed, limited in certain sectors. Now, communism, what is communism? It's total government control over the economy, no private property or businesses. Theoretically, a classless society. It has one party rule and almost always, without exception, becomes a dictator. How the world really works is that no country is purely capitalist or socialist. All democracies are a mix of both. The percent of the blend in each reflects citizens' values and tax tolerance. Even Russia, China, and Vietnam are a mix, but of capitalism and communism instead of socialism. US and Denmark, how their mix is compared. Of course, in the US, we have lower taxes, private healthcare and education, much less spending on social programs as a percentage of the economy. In Denmark, which is much smaller, of course, and much easier to do these things and much more homogeneous, has high taxes, universal health care, universal education, strong worker protections, and very high public satisfaction. They love the way their economy works, and they pay one of the highest rates of taxes in the world, but they don't mind it because they get a lot of services for it. Where in the US, we don't have a lot of that. The US already has socialist elements: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, the SNAP program. We have public schools in this country, and we have government subsidies for industries. And this is really a key thing that takes us away from what pure capitalism is. The dangers of pure capitalism. America is not fully capitalist. It's certainly more capitalist than most other countries, but we are not fully capitalist. Historic economic crashes in the 1800s and then 1929 uh, really taught us some lessons. In the 1800s, there were a number of what we would term today as depressions, not even recessions, but actual depressions. There were stock market crashes multiple times over the decades, and the economy was going around like a ping pong ball, from highs to lows, from profitability to not only losses but unemployment. There were no protections for workers in those days. If you remember, a lot of companies had their company towns where they ran the town. They profited from selling the townsmen and their employees goods, groceries, things like that. And the employers controlled virtually every aspect of the life of the employees, especially in West Virginia and Ohio and those places, and the mining communities and places like that. If you ever watched any stories about Rockefeller and how he got started and what he did in Pittsburgh, you can get an idea. If you watch that show on HBO, The Gilded Thing, they covered that in the first season or the second season about how he caused a strike to happen and then fired a lot of people and got rid of a lot of workers. So it was a lot of worker exploitation, a lot of boom and bust cycles. And finally, uh, we got to 1929. And of course, we had the deep depression that lasted, a very long time. And it was only when FDR, came in with Social Security and all these other programs that at the time they considered very socialist, and they were hard fought. But that's what really pulled us out before the war. Now in New York, they just elected for the Democratic candidate to go in November for New York City mayoral candidate Mondami, who really is a socialist, and he says that he calls himself a democratic socialist. Now, I did another video on what he claims he is and what democratic socialism means, which is not the same socialism here, where we have democracy involved. He actually has said that he hates and really just thinks that we just should have a socialist government. He wants to eliminate capitalism. He has publicly said that. He proposes public ownership of housing, free mass transit. Well, this isn't really true. The free mass transit and universal basic income. The mass transit, as I said in the other video, I don't have a problem with. You're starting to see that around the world in major cities where the taxes are covering buses and metro systems. But what he also is, and not even the universal basic income, but what he is proposing is things like a city-owned grocery store, which to me that doesn't even make sense because grocery stores' margins are so thin. 2, 3, even 4% is nothing like other businesses that are making 40% margins and 50% margins. For the city to go and do the expenses of building out grocery stores, it'll never happen. Um, he also wants rent freezes. And while these ideas are radical and appeal to some voters, and especially the young, and I cover again in the video why I think the young people are being so attracted to this, and that's because nobody's answering their desires, nobody's filling in the blanks for them and giving them solutions that seem rational at this point. Nobody's even addressing the young people and their concerns at this point. The Democratic Party has just been a disaster. But moving on, I didn't want to make this political. They're unlikely to be implemented due to budgetary limits and lack of broad political support. I wanted to explain to you how capitalism and socialism works and how the US is set up. It's really less important about the other countries than our own. And I wanted to show you how things move along a sliding scale here. Pre-Obamacare, pre-2010, we had a healthcare system in America that was and still is for the most part, a private, what we call a private healthcare system. And that would be on the far left here of this scale. Then you had Obamacare become law of the land in 2010. And what that did was it offered some government assistance for some people. It offered a government program of insurance, but not for all people. It sort of just filled in the blanks where the insurance wasn't offered for certain groups of people, but it still left the private sector in control of the marketplace, except for they did remove the ability to charge on pre-existing conditions. They did take that away, and that is somewhat of a costly item for the private sector. But aside from that, it really only moved the scale over a bit. It certainly did not move to socialism. We still have what is widely considered to be a private healthcare system with some socialist additions in it with Obamacare. And now with the big bad bill, you've actually pulled this red line here to the left a bit by reducing some of the coverage that they have and by changing some of the requirements for it. And so it'll end up dropping people off of it by design. So we clearly are in a capitalistic situation. Now, we've all heard about Medicare for all. And if that were to happen, that is where we no longer have any private health care in this country, and everything comes through the government. It's paid for through taxes, and everybody would basically have Medicare, which, to be honest with you, I have Medicare, and it ain't bad. It's actually easier to use than anything in the private sector I've ever used, and they cover everything I've ever needed. But let's not go there, because I'm not a socialist by any stretch of the imagination, although I think healthcare could be discussed. I did want you to see how this worked, though, on the sliding scale, and I think it lays out visually how things work. Another example is the oil and gas industry. One of the last things I mentioned in the U.S. List was that the U.S. helps and subsidizes certain private sector industries at various times. Biden subsidized to a very big degree the chips industry to get them to make computer chips here in America and to move it off of Taiwan. And we gave up billions and billions and billions in taxes to get them to come here. And that's an incentive. And we do that as a way to design our economy to bring certain things in that we feel are strategic for our economy and for our safety to do. So oil and gas has always been one of those industries that's always been a joint venture between the government and private sector. And it's just always slid along the scale as to the various rules and regulations that seem to come in and out every few years. So under Obama came in and he implemented a number of regulations and reduced some pollution. He also did something which was for the first time in 40 years at that point, where he eliminated the ability of the U.S. oil and gas industry to sell crude oil outside the country. So we opened that up, and that was great for Exxon and Mobil and all these companies. So Obama was, you would put him maybe a little here. I might even have him a little bit too far right to the socialism thing. But just as a comparison, then you had Trump administration #1 come in, and they got rid of some of the regulations that Obama implemented and went even further with the ability to sell crude oil outside the United States. And their other goal was energy independence. And so you move this slide from where Obama is back to the left on capitalism. So it became more capitalistic. Again, still government designed, still government chosen, where they use the tax system, where they use the regulations. And this is, private-public partnerships is what they call it. And this is, goes along the line of capitalism and socialism. And it's just not a pure system. If the government's involved at all, that moves you away from the far left of capitalism into some type of socialism. Now, Biden came in, and as we know, he did his green energy package, which really moved this line to the right quite a bit towards socialism, and really put on a lot of regulations onto the oil and gas industry. Uh, Withdrew a number of lands and drilling areas in the water, and this was all to encourage more investment in the green spaces, in solar technology and all those other green areas. And so that moved it way to the right. And now you had Trump too come back in, and it hasn't been very long yet, but we already know that they've overturned quite a bit of the regulations uh, for pollution and everything else, and they moved this line again back from, let's say, the middle. I don't think it was quite the middle, but let's just say the middle, back to about where Trump was before, maybe even to the left of where he was before, because they are opening up more drilling sites, including Alaska, which had been off limits for a long, long time, and pipelines and everything else. So he even went further than he did last time towards the capitalism again. But this just gives you an example of how this moves and how things go along right and left. I hope this answers some questions about just the basics of how this works, how capitalism works, how socialism plays a role in here, and how we as a public and we as a government can't have pure capitalism or pure socialism. If we just had pure socialism, that would not be America. But pure capitalism would put us back into the 1800s, and we wouldn't want to be there either. And so this blend has worked very well. And even in China, even in Russia, you have capitalists. You have China, which is a government controlled. They control what industries should get money and how it should happen, but it's still capitalistic. They still have people investing, private companies, and the stock exchange and everything else. It's not the government putting all the money in. Russia is the same thing, although they did less planning of their economy and let the oligarchs do more of their own thing about what industries got done and what got promoted and what didn't. And that's also part of why Russia's had such problems, because they have so much money in oil and gas and so much of their income coming from that. They never diversified their economy enough. Well, quite frankly, they could have. They could have used the policies that we use, or that China even uses, to attract more investment in other areas and pull it away from oil and gas, and it would have diversified. And poor Putin, he might have had a better economy right now than what he's facing. So I hope that answers questions. I hope this is helpful. As I said, it's not political as to the fact that we are a blended economy and all everywhere is. It's just a matter of degrees. And this is the way you keep stability. This is the way you keep workers safe. This is the way you keep the economies going on a more steady basis. None of us would want to go back to where we have recessions or depressions, and then on to great spikes in wealth, and then back to a depression again, and then back to wealth again. And meanwhile, people's lives are being ruined up and down the whole time. So this mix really stabilizes and smooths things out. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting. Please like, comment, and share, and look forward to more videos. Thank you.